All right, well, we are making our way through the 66 books of the Bible in 52 weeks during 2021, and tonight we're going to take a look at the book of Proverbs. And this will be a fun one to look at. This is one that many people go to, and you can kind of open up a chapter and find some wisdom out of it and kind of go bit by bit, and just you can go open up like one chapter and find something, or maybe even after a few verses. At the same time, it does have an organization to it. It does have a flow to it. And so we'll just give an overview of it. And so we'll start, first of all, with just what the book of Proverbs is, just the outline here that you can pick up that on here in the outline that you can pick up here in the church. You can pick up these colorful, the printed outlines here. So here we have it's the 20th book in the Bible. It's got 31 chapters, and it is considered a book of wisdom and poetry. Now, there's several ways you can divide the book up here. This outline here puts it into just different types of proverbs, and so we have the first 9 chapters is wisdom to the descendants of a person, and then you have couplets and comparisons, quads and more, just different types of structures of poems or of statements of wisdom. There's some additional proverbs, and then the writings of Agur and King Lemuel. And so we'll look at this from a different angle here in the rest of our outline, but there's just an overview if you want to take a look at that. If you want to think of a key verse, there are so many quotable verses in the book of Proverbs. One key verse you could say is this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom designed to provide instruction for life. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to have wisdom literature. So the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom, and just an explanation about wisdom literature. This is where history books tell the narrative of God's story. We learned about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the kings, and all the stuff that happened. Wisdom literature focuses on the big picture, questions about God, humanity, creation, evil, suffering, just living out life. And the 5 books considered to be wisdom literature be Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. We call these poetry as well. So they kind of go back and forth. They're written in poetic form, but they could also be called wisdom literature here. So what would be the difference if you're thinking of it in terms of wisdom, or if it's poetry? What would be the difference between Psalms and Proverbs? Well, I've got a little chart here that might help if you want to compare Psalms to Proverbs. And so Psalms is primarily focusing on worship. Proverbs is primarily focusing on wisdom. The Psalms speaks to your spirit, generally speaking. The Proverbs speaks to your mind, your wisdom, your intellect. Psalms teaches us how to be holy before God. Proverbs teaches us how to practice our holiness in our relationships or before people. Psalms generally teaches you to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. Proverbs teaches you to love your neighbor as yourself. So these are just painting with wide brushes here, but this is kind of the idea, comparing Psalms to Proverbs. So about the book of Proverbs itself. The name for the book there you have, there's been called several names. The original Hebrew title was called the Proverbs of Solomon. And then later on it came to be known as the Book of Wisdom. Latin translations named it the Book of Proverbs, and now it has just been shortened to just Proverbs, but it's all referring to the same things. You've just got some different titles for the same book. So you have some different authors here. A lot of times people naturally assume that Solomon, who was given wisdom, was supposedly the wisest man to ever live. A lot of people assume that he's the sole author. However, There are at least two others. You have Agur, A-G-U-R. He was the son of Jachin. We don't really know much about him. And then there is a King Lemuel. So some, though, think that King Lemuel is actually referring to Solomon in some way. So there's a little debate over that, but we know that there's not just Solomon that wrote that. So let's take a look at some definitions here so you know when you're reading through here what exactly is a proverb. So a proverb is a brief, observant statement declaring a profound truth that gives wisdom for living. Proverbs are not promises or prophecies. So they are general statements of wisdom. Here's a modern proverb, relatively speaking. Early to bed, early to rise, what does it do? Makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. You've heard of those things. It's a proverb. So let's just show the difference here between a promise, a prophecy, and a proverb. Here's an example of a promise. God is speaking to Abraham. God says, "The Lord has said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." That's a promise. Okay, that is a promise to Abraham. On the other hand, you have a prophecy. Here is Isaiah's prophecies, one of Isaiah's prophecies about Jesus, predicting a future event. Isaiah 7:14. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." So now you have a proverb. Here's an example. This is an instruction about giving from Proverbs chapter 3. "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine." Now, would you consider this a guarantee that if you're faithful in giving, that everything's going to be perfect financially all the time? It's not a guarantee. It's a proverb. It's a general truth. It's a general statement of wisdom here. So let's take a look here now at some of the content that you'll find in the book of Proverbs here, how this all works out here. So most of the book of Proverbs, and I think a lot of people like to read in Proverbs because of this, most of Proverbs is what you could call sentence wisdom. People will have certain sayings about things, and I've known people that are known for just saying these sentence wisdom. Our good friend Coach Dave Klontz, he has a lot of those. Probably his most famous one: "You live life forward and you understand it backwards." Just a general principle of life. That could be a modern proverb. Now, you're not adding that to the scriptures. It's just how the language works here. So one of the things that you'll have in Proverbs, you'll have a subject and a statement. It's a statement containing a complete idea. So here's some different types of statements here. And again, here's some more $3 literary words here, but you can see what they mean here, all right? First of all, you have a contrastive statement, a contrast. So those kind of statements, if you go through, you can see a statement that has the word "but" in it, or "however." So an example here would be Proverbs 11:13. "A gossip betrays a confidence, but in contrast, a trustworthy person keeps a secret." Another example, "It is a sin to despise one's neighbor, but, however, in contrast, blessed is the one who is kind to the needy." Now you have the next one, which is completive, where it's where you're completing a thought, and it's generally going to use the term "and" or "so" in it, completing a thought. So here's some examples of that. "The righteous person is rescued from trouble, and it falls on the wicked instead." It completes it. "The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life, and the one who is wise saves lives." It's completing a thought there. So you've got the word and, or therefore. You can. So this is the next one here. You would have comparative. So it uses words like better than or like. So you're comparing one thing to another to make a point. So you can see a lot of these things are things we do in modern day language too. It's just how they're getting a point across. And again, a lot of this stuff, it's poetry. It's stuff that flows off the tongue. Why do we remember, ask not what you can do for your country, but what your country, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It really flows off the tongue, didn't it? But why do we say certain things like this? You live life forward, you understand it backwards. It just kind of flows off the tongue. You remember it, and it sticks to your heart. God knows that, and He used that in His Word. And so here we have Proverbs 16:8. Here's a comparative. Better is a little with righteous than much gain with justice. So you're comparing two things there. I'd rather have a little bit and be righteous than have a whole bunch of money and have injustice. Another one would be Proverbs 25:26. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. What a great image that is. You can see that, and you can just picture it. So you have the idea of subjects and statements. Then you have the idea of people and problems. So Proverbs provides a wide array of characters, such as you'll meet, quote unquote, the simple, the wise, the proud, the humble, the violent, the angry, the rich, the poor, the oppressor, sluggards, liars, slanderers, adulterers, and the lady of wisdom. So you have these characters, in a sense, that, so the liar does such and such, or the sluggard does such and such. And so the problems are vices, and the Proverbs gives us the virtues to overcome them. So here's some examples here of that. Proverbs 3:31. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways. So that the character, the violent. Don't look up to the violent person. Or Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to a lender. Just making an observation there. Proverbs 13:4. A sluggard's appetite is never filled, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. So Proverbs 13:5. Talking about just different types of people. The righteous hate what is false, but the wicked make themselves a stench and bring shame on themselves. And so you can see how the language is being used there. And then there is another one of these here. And now you'll see here, there's some of these Psalms, Proverbs, we call them numeric proverbs. And here's an example, Proverbs 6:16 and following. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to Him. Now, why is it worded like that? Here's what that means. All 7 things are terrible, but the last one is especially bad. So there's 6 things the Lord hates, 7 things are terrible. So verse 17, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, and a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. So you've got those together. It's a list, and it's using a list to just make a point there.
Why would they have 17 eyes when it takes 2 eyes for a person?
Why would they have 17 eyes?
Yeah, it's like one person has 1 eye.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm not.
Odd number.
Yeah, I know. That's a good. That's verse 17. I was trying to think that was where it says verse 17. So those are just the verse numbers. Yeah, right. So it's haughty. So you don't. I was wondering. Okay, now wait a minute. Did I miss something here? So. Okay. Yep. So that was there would be some real people and problems if you had 17 eyes too. So especially if you had 17 mouths, then you'd really have some problems. So, Well, that brings us to the next thing you'll see. You'll see counseling and correction. And so throughout Proverbs, you see the writers, they're imparting wisdom in several ways. You have the contrast. You have, if you remember last week when we did the book of Psalms, there was the couplets of how you put two sentences together and they kind of match. It's not really about rhyming, it's about matching ideas together. There's the numerical proverbs that we talked about, 6 things I hate, 7 things I detest. The first 6 are bad, the 7th one was really bad, that type of thing. And so then you have the use of acrostics, where you have either alphabet or a letter that kind of heads up like of each paragraph or each couplet in a poem. So this is how Proverbs is put together. And so we're going to do an attempt at looking at an outline here of the book of Proverbs. But I will put a disclaimer. Putting headings on each chapter of Proverbs is an imperfect art, because each chapter might cover a variety of subjects. So I could go through the book of Proverbs a couple of times and come up with some different headings or a way to explain it, but this is just a general attempt to go through and say, here's what you're going to find, and I'm going to read some of the passages as we go through here. So chapters 1 through 9, you have wisdom and folly are contrasted in chapters 1 through 9. This section, if you look at it, it really resembles giving advice to a young man as he is growing up. If you go through these chapters here, and we watching them grow through each stage of life and giving them advice as they are growing up and entering into the world. So Proverbs 1 is basically the young person starting out in life. And so let me just read to you a couple passages here. Proverbs 1, 8, and 9. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are gall to grace your head, and a chain to adorn your neck. And then wisdom here in these chapters are presented as a person. Proverbs 1, verse 20. Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out, and at the city gate, she makes her speech. And so this is a person calling out to their child, to their one they're raising, saying, hey, you need to put wisdom into your life. So then Proverbs 2 could be looked at, the child is beginning to grow up and branch out a little bit. 2 verses 1 through 5. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as silver and search for it as his hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So you're growing up and branching out, and then Proverbs 3, the child is being encouraged to stay grounded as they continue to grow up. Proverbs 3, verses 1 and 2. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life for many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Now again, thinking of a proverb, you bring peace and prosperity. Is this a guarantee that if you do these things, everything's going to be perfect in your life and you're going to always be wealthy and have things going your way? It's not a guarantee. It's a general truth, wisdom of life. You could call it best practices. They use that term in business, right? This is best practices for life. Proverbs chapter 4 talks about telling this child to guard their heart in the real world. When we raise our children, we're going to let them out. We want the best for them, no matter what age they are. So Proverbs 4, 20 through 23. My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Advice for a person who is starting out in life here. And then you have Proverbs 5 and 6. protecting your home. The young man now is counseled to live a pure life for the sake of his home. There's a warning about adultery here in Proverbs 5, 3 through 5. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and her steps lead straight to the grave. Boy, that's quite a warning there, isn't it? And then he goes on to say in the 5th chapter, verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. And I think we know what he's saying there, what he means by that. And then just talking about being faithful in your marriage, but also providing for your family. Proverbs 6, verse 9 and following. How long will you lie there, sluggard? You know, that would be a good thing to put on your alarm clock, to have that play. You know, if you want to wake up in the morning. How long will you lie there, sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands and rest. And poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. Then, Proverbs 7, we have more warnings against adultery. Proverbs 7, 26 and 27. Many are the victims, she, that is the adulterous woman, she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Wow, what a vivid picture that is, isn't it? And then Proverbs 8, child's growing up, the idea of attending the quote-unquote college of wisdom. Proverbs 8, beginning in verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord, to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight, I have power. By me kings reign and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern and nobles, all who rule on earth. And again, just carrying knowledge into your life, no matter where life will take you. And then finally, in this section here, you have choosing between wisdom and folly. All your life, everything you do is a choice. Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. That verse right there, Proverbs 9:10, could have been the key verse for this whole thing as well. And then a few verses down and beginning in verse 13. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house and on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. My goodness, isn't that a powerful way to put something? You know, such a, what's again?
What did you just read from?
This is Proverbs chapter 9, beginning in verse 13. So those are, and so under each one of these, I'll try to just read from that chapter. So you should just be able to go chapter by chapter through here, and I'll say out again what the different verses are. Okay, so now we have section number 2, and this would be chapters 10 through 24. These are the Proverbs of Solomon. They were written and set in order by Solomon himself. So he put these in order. He wrote these. He put them in the order that they're in. That's chapters 10 through 24. So if you look at Proverbs chapter 10, you have a couple of key words there, wise and righteous. So Proverbs 10 and verse 23. A fool finds pleasure in wicked schemes, but a person of understanding delights in wisdom. You got that word but in there. You're contrasting something. So there is that in verse chapter 11. There's a contrast between righteousness and wickedness, or righteous and wicked. Proverbs 11 and verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. So there's an example of something you'll find in that chapter there. Then chapter 12 spends some time talking about the wise use of speech. So Proverbs 12, if you look in verse 18 and 19, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. I mean, it's so precise and concise, but the truth has a way of just cutting through to the heart, doesn't it? It just gets right through. So then we have in Proverbs 13, benefits of accepting instruction. You know, if a person is teachable, they can have an advantage over a lot of people. If you refuse to be teachable, then you have a disadvantage. Proverbs 13 and verse 1. A wise son heeds his father's instructions, but a mocker does not respond to rebukes. Verse 13 of that same chapter. A wise son heeds his father's instruction. I think I have the wrong verse there, but you get the idea. I think I put that in there twice. But again, you have this idea of accepting instructions in there. So that brings us to Proverbs chapter 14. Avoiding the influence of fools. It's just kind of funny to have it say it that way, but Proverbs 14:7, stay away from a fool, for you will not find knowledge on their lips. Why do I want to sound like Mr. T when I start reading that? Remember, I pity the fool. Proverbs 14:9, fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright here. So again, you just want to avoid being influenced by people that choose the foolish way or the unwise way. And then there's, in Proverbs 15, self-control in speech. This is probably one that would be familiar to a lot of you here. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. Then Proverbs 16, continuing in Solomon's, this is the ones that Solomon has put in order here. Instructions about the heart. And so the idea here is your heart prepared, proud, purposeful, prudent, or perverse? Just talking about just different conditions of the heart. Proverbs 16:9, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Now, we'll move into Proverbs chapter 17. Proverbs 17, you have what could be best described as a spiritual inventory. So I'm going to go down through this. We'll look at verse 4, 5, 9, 14. I'll say them out here if you just want to keep your finger going down that passage if you're studying here. So Proverbs 17:4. The question is, what do you listen to? A wicked person listens to deceitful lips. A liar pays attention to a destructive tongue. Proverbs 17:5. You can ask the question, what do you celebrate? Whoever mocks the poor shows contempt for their maker. Whoever gloats over disaster will not go unpunished. Next question you could ask is, what do you talk about? Proverbs 17:9. Whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. In other words, are you a busybody constantly trying to stir up division? You know that person that likes to stir the pot. And so this is what are you talking about? Another question to ask, Proverbs 17:14. What do you get angry at? What makes you angry? Verse 14. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam, so drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. So controlling your anger. And then verse 23, what do you give into? Taking a spiritual inventory here. The wicked accept bribes in secret to pervert the course of justice. So a little spiritual inventory in chapter 17. We won't go that much in detail in every chapter here. And then Proverbs 18, you have more advice about the use of the tongue. Proverbs 18:18, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. You know that person that they don't listen, they just wait to say the next thing? Or have you ever been guilty of that? I think I have been guilty of that. So then Proverbs 19. So they have some comparisons and contrasts. I won't read any particular verse, but you see some comparisons between the rich and the poor, the wise and the foolish, fathers and sons. You see that in the chapter. And then in chapter 20, Solomon talks about considering the consequences of actions. Now, here's a general proverb here. Proverb 20 and verse 1, wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. So, again, general principle of life. Proverbs 20 and 25. It is a trap to dedicate something rashly, only later to consider one's vows. In other words, to make a promise that you can't keep. So just considering the consequences, thinking about your actions. One sign of wisdom is thinking through the consequences before you do or say something. Proverbs 21 is some general teaching on the providence of God. And if you understand the providence of God, that God is in control, then you can have perspective on life. Proverbs 21 and verse 1, in the Lord's hand the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels towards all who please him. In Proverbs 21:30, there is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. Proverbs 22, so the next chapter here would be Proverbs 22. We have the importance of character. This is a familiar one, I think, to probably many of us here. Proverbs 22:1. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. I heard somebody put it this way. We live in an age where people would rather be envied than esteemed. And I think that's a good way to put it here. Proverbs, and that wisdom is as ancient as Proverbs here. Now, Proverbs 22, beginning in verse 17, going on here, you have a little section there called, it's 30 sayings of the wise. And it's just a collection of saying on a variety of different topics. We won't go through those here, but those are just a variety of sayings. And it's just put in this little context and in that order there. And then you have Proverbs 24, 23 through chapter 34. And these are additional words of wisdom. Proverbs 24, 23 and through 30, verse 34. Additional words of wisdom. And this concludes this particular section of the book here. So then that takes you to the next one. It's more Proverbs of Solomon, but they were set in order by the men of Hezekiah during Hezekiah's reign. So this is chapters 25 through 29. We'll go through and just read a couple of things here. Proverbs 25, he talks about leaders, neighbors, and enemies. And so, it's just general talk about the society at large and living in society. I'll read one of the verses here, Proverbs 25:9. If you take your neighbor to court, do not betray another's confidence. Now this, you might find this interesting. Proverbs 25, beginning in verse 21. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Sounds almost like the teachings of Jesus, doesn't it? He's echoing the Proverbs, the wisdom there. So, Proverbs 26, again, some people to avoid. The fool, the sluggard, and the troublemaker. So, if you see a fool coming your way, you walk on the other side of the street. If you see a sluggard sleeping, then don't try to be like that person and stay away from troublemakers. Chapter 27 talks about the value of friendship. I really like this one, such wisdom in this. 27 verse 6, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. How was it that Jesus was betrayed by Judas? What did Judas do? Judas pretended to be his friend, but what did he do? Gave him a kiss. Betrayed him with a kiss. So, now this brings us to Proverbs 28. More talk about citizens and leaders. Now, I think about this in Proverbs 28 in verse 1 when I'm driving and I am going along and I happen to see a police officer with a radar gun and I find myself hitting my brake real quick. Proverbs 28:1, the wicked flee though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So, I must be just assuming that I'm speeding. And if I'm feeling guilty, hit that brake, real quick when you see the police officer. Proverbs 28 and verse 16, a tyrannical ruler practices extortion, but one who hates ill-gotten gain will enjoy a long reign. General Proverbs there. Chapter 29, we have more wisdom for society at large. I'll read here a couple of these. 29 and verse 4. By justice a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down. 29 and verse 8. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn anger away. So now we come to the oracle of Agur, and he was an unknown sage. We don't really know who exactly this person is, but that's where you're at Proverbs chapter 30, and he speaks about wealth, family, and warns against turning away from God. And then we have finally chapter 31, the sayings of King Lemuel. The first part of this chapter here, you have warnings against drunkenness. It's kind of interesting here about not being given in to too much wine or strong drink, and the warnings that can go with that. And then it closes out with this beautiful passage on the wife of noble character. And there's been several times that at a memorial service for some dear saints who've gone on to be with the Lord that you read this, and it just so much reflects that person's life. And you can think of women who have just lived for the Lord. And it's interesting too, as you read this, some people have this misnomer that the Bible teaches that women are just to stay at home and not be productive. They're just supposed to do stuff around the house and not be ambitious in business or anything like that. But here you have this woman, this wife of noble character, who's into real estate. She has her own business where she sells. She is profitable in her business, and she is held up for being profitable in what she does. And so really the biblical example, that the virtue that's held up, this is a person who, yes, loves her family, supports her family, gives to the poor, is generous in that way, but is very productive, very profitable in what she does. So it's just a beautiful passage there. So we'll finish out here, and I think we're doing good on time. Applications, or what the purpose of Proverbs is. If you want to go back to the very first chapter of the book, and this gives us the overview of what the book is, and on your outline there's some things we'll write down once we read this. But let me just read to you Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. So these are the Proverbs here, beginning in verse 2 of chapter 1. For gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence for those who are simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. So, I like the way this is laid out here. I found this little outline here explaining this passage here. So what's the purposes of the book of Proverbs? First of all, to give reverence to the heart, to make sure your heart is in the right condition there. And so for gaining wisdom, instruction, insight. And then for providing discernment to the eye, words of insight. That's the vision that you see there. To develop alertness in the walk, for receiving instructions, prudent behavior on how to walk In other words, sometimes the Bible will use that term, how is your walk, referring to the way you live out your life. And then to establish direction and purpose in life. And again, that's giving wisdom to those who need it. And then to cultivate a keenness of mind. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, discerning, and guidance. And so all of these things, so it's for the heart, for the eye, for the walk, for your life, and for your mind. So these are the things. I'll leave those up there if you're trying to get those jotted down. But this is the book of Proverbs, and I'm grateful that God speaks to us in different ways. He speaks to us through His promises. He speaks to us through His prophecies, but also He speaks to us through these proverbs that we can take with us in our daily life.